The bruises on Sarah Whitmore's wrists were still purple when they led her onto the auction platform in Clifton, Arizona. And that was when Zane Decker's world tilted on its axis. He had come down from his mountain cabin only because his trapping partner Dutch had insisted the town needed able-bodied men for the spring cattle drive. But now Zane stood frozen in the crowded square, his massive hands clenched into fists as he watched the slender woman with auburn hair try to hide those marks beneath the sleeves of her worn calico dress. The June sun beat down mercilessly on the dusty platform where 5 women stood in a nervous line, all of them brought west by the Continental Bride Company to marry settlers and miners who had paid good money for wives. It was 1882, and such arrangements were common enough in these remote Arizona territories where women were scarce and men were plentiful. But Zane had never given bride auctions much thought until this moment. The auctioneer, a portly man named Henderson with a handlebar mustache, was droning on about the virtues of each woman, their ages, their skills in cooking and sewing, their religious backgrounds. Sarah stood third in line, her green eyes downcast, her shoulders hunched as though she wanted to disappear into herself. She was small, perhaps 5 feet and 3 inches at most, with a delicate frame that made Zane's protective instincts roar to life in a way that shocked him. He was 30 years old and had spent the last 8 years in these mountains, trapping beaver and hunting game, living a solitary existence that suited his temperament. Women had been a distant concern, something other men worried about. But those bruises changed everything. Who put those marks on her? Zane's voice cut through Henderson's sales pitch like a knife through butter, deep and rough from months of minimal conversation. The crowd turned to stare at him. This giant of a man with shoulder-length dark hair tied back with a leather cord, muscles straining against his buckskin shirt, his weathered face set in hard lines. He stood well over 6 feet tall, and his presence commanded attention even in a crowd of rough frontier men. Henderson blinked, clearly thrown off his rhythm. "I beg your pardon?" Zane pushed through the gathered men, most of whom stepped aside quickly. He had a reputation in these parts for being fair but dangerous when provoked, and his size alone made arguments unwise. "The woman there," he said, pointing at Sarah. "She has bruises on her wrists, fresh ones. Who put those marks on her?" Sarah's head snapped up, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and surprise. She quickly pulled her sleeves down further, but it was too late. Several other men in the crowd had noticed now, murmuring among themselves. Henderson cleared his throat, clearly uncomfortable. "Now, Mr. Decker, these women come from difficult circumstances. The Continental Bride Company rescues them from unfortunate situations back east and gives them a fresh start here in the territories. Whatever happened before they arrived is not our concern." "It is my concern," Zane said flatly. He looked directly at Sarah, and their eyes met for the first time. He saw intelligence there, and pain, and something else that made his chest tighten. Defiance, perhaps, or determination. She was not broken, despite what had been done to her. The auctioneer tried to regain control of the situation. "Gentlemen, we have several fine women here today, all eager to begin new lives with respectable husbands. The bidding will start at $50 for each lady, and I assure you that all of them come with proper references and documentation." But Zane was not listening. He was still looking at Sarah, and she was still looking at him. And something unspoken passed between them in that dusty Arizona square. He saw her lips part slightly, saw the way her breathing quickened, and he knew with absolute certainty that he could not let another man bid on her, could not let her go home with some stranger who might hurt her again. $500, Zane said. The crowd gasped. It was an astronomical sum, more than twice what most men paid for a bride, more than many miners made in half a year of backbreaking work. Henderson's eyes went wide, and a calculating smile spread across his face. $500 for the young lady, Miss Sarah Whitmore, age 22, from Philadelphia. Do I hear any other bids? The silence was absolute. Men shifted uncomfortably, glancing between Zane and the platform. Everyone knew the mountain man had money saved from years of successful trapping. But this was still a shocking amount to spend on a woman's sight unseen, so to speak. Going once, Henderson called. Going twice. He paused dramatically. Sold to Mr. Zane Decker for $500. Zane moved toward the platform, pulling a leather pouch from his coat. He counted out the money in gold coins and banknotes, his jaw tight. Henderson counted it carefully, then gestured for Sarah to step down. She moved slowly, her eyes still on Zane, trying to read this stranger who had just paid a fortune for her. When she reached the ground, Zane held out his hand. Sarah hesitated for just a moment before placing her small, bruised hand in his large, calloused one. The contact sent a jolt through both of them, and Zane very carefully, very gently, turned her wrist to examine the marks more closely. Who did this? He asked quietly, his voice for her alone. Sarah's throat worked as she swallowed. The man who ran the bride company's boarding house in Santa Fe, she whispered. Mr. Garrett. He said I was not properly grateful for the opportunity I had been given. He said I needed to learn obedience. Rage flooded through Zane, hot and fierce, but he kept it carefully controlled. He released her hand and turned to Henderson. You sent these women through Santa Fe? Through Garrett's boarding house? Henderson shifted uncomfortably. Many of our brides stay there briefly during the journey west. It is a convenient stopping point. That man is a brute, Zane said flatly. If you send more women through there, their blood will be on your hands. He looked at the other women on the platform. Did he hurt any of you? Two of them nodded hesitantly. One was crying silently. Zane cursed under his breath, then looked at the crowd. You men thinking of bidding, you should know what you are getting. Not damaged goods, but women who have been mistreated and deserve better. Treat them right or answer to me. Several men nodded seriously. Others looked uncomfortable but thoughtful. Zane turned back to Sarah and offered his arm. Come on, let us get you somewhere safe. Sarah placed her hand on his arm, feeling the solid muscle beneath the buckskin, and let him lead her through the crowd. People parted for them like water around a boulder. Zane's horse, a massive roan gelding named Thunder, was tied outside the general store. Zane swung into the saddle with easy grace despite his size, then reached down for Sarah. I will take you up in front of me, he said. My cabin is about 2 hours north, up in the mountains. It is rough country, but you will be safe there. Sarah bit her lip, uncertainty flickering across her face. You paid $500 for me, Mr. Decker. What do you expect in return? Zane's expression softened slightly. I expect you to heal from whatever happened to you. I expect you to eat regular meals and sleep without fear. Beyond that, we will figure it out as we go. I am not a man who forces himself on women, if that is what you are asking. Something in his tone, in his eyes, made Sarah believe him. She nodded and let him lift her effortlessly onto the saddle in front of him. His arms came around her to hold the reins, and she found herself enclosed in his strength, surrounded by the scent of leather and pine and something indefinably masculine. It should have frightened her after what Mr. Garrett had done, but instead, she felt safer than she had in months. They rode out of Clifton in silence, following a narrow trail that wound up into the Mogollon Rim country. The landscape was dramatic here, with towering ponderosa pines and steep canyons cutting through red rock formations. Sarah had never seen anything like it. Philadelphia had been all cobblestone streets and brick buildings, crowded and noisy and gray. This was wild and open and beautiful in a way that made her chest ache. "Have you lived here long?" she asked after a while, needing to break the silence. 8 years, Zane replied. "I came west after the war. Could not settle back into civilization after what I had seen. The mountains suited me better." "You were a soldier?" "For a time. Union Army, though I try not to think about it much." Sarah nodded. Many men out here were running from something, she knew. War, debt, crimes real or imagined. The territories were a place where you could reinvent yourself, leave the past behind. She wondered what her own future would look like now. "What about you?" Zane asked. "How did you end up with the bride company?" Sarah was quiet for a long moment. "My father died 2 years ago," she finally said. "He was a clerk, and we were never wealthy, but we managed. After he died, I tried to find work, but respectable positions for women are scarce in Philadelphia. I was staying with my aunt, but her husband made it clear I was not welcome. The bride company seemed like my only option for a fresh start." "And Garrett hurt you?" It was not a question, but Sarah answered anyway. "He said I was too educated, too opinionated. He said Western men wanted obedient wives, not women who read books and asked questions. When I argued with him, he grabbed my wrists and twisted until I cried. Then he locked me in my room for 2 days without food to teach me humility." Zane's arms tightened around her, and she felt the tension in his body. "I am sorry that happened to you. No man should treat a woman that way." "Why did you bid on me?" Sarah asked. "You do not know me. I could be a terrible cook or a spendthrift or any number of things." "Because of those bruises," Zane said simply. "I saw them, and I knew I could not let you go with someone else. Could not take the chance that you would end up with a man who would hurt you worse. I have money saved from trapping. $500 is a lot, but it is not worth more than a person's safety." Sarah turned her head to look at him and found his face very close to hers. His eyes were a startling blue, like the sky at high altitude, and there were lines around them from squinting against the sun. He had a strong jaw covered with several days of dark stubble and a mouth that looked like it smiled rarely. He was, she realized, quite handsome in a rough, untamed way. "That is the kindest thing anyone has ever done for me," she said softly. Zane looked uncomfortable with the praise. "It is just common decency." "No," Sarah said. "It is not. Most men would not have noticed. Or if they did, they would not have cared. You did both. That matters." They rode in silence after that, but it was a more comfortable silence now. The trail grew steeper, and Thunder picked his way carefully over rocky patches and through narrow defiles. Sarah found herself relaxing against Zane's chest, lulled by the steady rhythm of the horse's gait and the warmth of the afternoon sun. When they finally reached Zane's cabin, Sarah was surprised by how substantial it was. She had expected something crude, but this was a well-built log structure with a stone chimney, real glass windows, and a wide porch that overlooked the valley below. There was a small barn for the horse, a chicken coop, and what looked like a smokehouse for preserving meat. A creek ran nearby, its water clear and cold from mountain snowmelt. "This is beautiful," Sarah said as Zane helped her down from the saddle. "It is home," Zane said. He unsaddled Thunder and led the horse into the barn, giving him water and feed. Sarah followed, watching the efficient way he moved, the care he took with his animal. When he was finished, he showed her into the cabin. The interior was dim and cool, a welcome relief from the afternoon heat. There was one large main room with a stone fireplace, a sturdy wooden table and chairs, a rocking chair near the hearth, and shelves lined with supplies and a surprising number of books. A ladder led up to a loft, presumably where Zane slept. The cabin was tidy and well organized, everything in its place. "You can have the loft," Zane said. "I will make myself a bedroll down here by the fire. There are blankets up there, and I will bring you some clean water for washing. Are you hungry?" Sarah realized she was ravenous. She had barely eaten in days. First because of Garrett's punishment, then because her stomach had been too nervous about the auction. "Yes, please." Zane nodded and began pulling things from his shelves. Within 20 minutes, he had beans cooking in a pot over the fire, cornbread baking in a Dutch oven, and coffee brewing in a battered tin pot. The smells made Sarah's mouth water. While the food cooked, Zane brought her a basin of water and a clean cloth. "You can wash up if you like. I will step outside to give you privacy." When he left, Sarah carefully rolled up her sleeves and examined the bruises on her wrists. They were fading from purple to yellow-green, ugly reminders of Garrett's cruelty. She washed her face and hands, then her arms, wincing slightly when the cloth touched the tender skin. By the time Zane returned, she felt somewhat more human. They ate in silence, but it was not awkward. Sarah found herself stealing glances at her unlikely rescuer, trying to understand this man who had spent a fortune on a stranger simply because she was hurt. He ate with the efficient motions of someone accustomed to solitude, but he made sure her plate was full and her coffee cup never empty. "This is very good," Sarah said after a while. "You are a better cook than I expected." "A man living alone learns to cook or starves," Zane said with a slight smile, the first she had seen from him. It transformed his face, making him look younger and more approachable. After they finished eating, Zane cleared the dishes, and Sarah helped him wash them in water heated over the fire. They worked together easily, falling into a rhythm that felt natural despite having just met. When they were done, Zane banked the fire and lit an oil lamp. "You must be exhausted," he said. "You should rest. Tomorrow we can talk about what comes next." Sarah nodded, suddenly feeling the weight of the day pressing down on her. She climbed the ladder to the loft and found it surprisingly comfortable, with a real mattress stuffed with straw and pine needles, several thick blankets, and even a pillow. Through the small window, she could see stars beginning to appear in the darkening sky, more stars than she had ever seen in her life. Below, she heard Zane moving around, preparing his bedroll. She lay down fully clothed, too tired to worry about propriety, and closed her eyes. For the first time in months, she felt safe. Whatever tomorrow brought, at least tonight she could sleep without fear. Sarah woke to the smell of bacon frying and bright sunlight streaming through the loft window. For a moment, she was disoriented, unable to remember where she was. But then the events of yesterday came flooding back. The auction, the mountain man with the fierce blue eyes, the long ride up into these beautiful mountains. She sat up slowly, working the kinks out of her back, and climbed down the ladder. Zane was at the stove, cooking breakfast with the same efficient motions he had used for dinner. He looked up when she descended and nodded a greeting. "Morning. There is fresh water in the basin if you want to wash up before eating." Sarah did so, then joined him at the table. He served her bacon, eggs from his chickens, and thick slices of bread toasted over the fire. She ate hungrily, realizing just how famished she had been. "We need to talk," Zane said when they were both finished. "About our arrangement." Sarah's stomach tightened with nervousness, but she kept her voice steady. All right. Zane leaned back in his chair, his large hands wrapped around his coffee cup. I bought you from that auction because I could not stand by and watch you go to someone who might hurt you. But I did not think through what happens next. Legally, we are supposed to be married within the week. That is how these bride contracts work. I know, Sarah said quietly, but I do not want you to feel forced into anything. You have been through enough already. Zane met her eyes directly. Here is what I am proposing. We get married on paper to satisfy the legal requirements. But in reality, we give ourselves time to get to know each other. You can stay here, safe and provided for, and we can decide together if we want to make this a real marriage or if we want to find another solution. Sarah studied him carefully. What kind of other solution? I do not know yet. Maybe we become business partners instead of spouses. Maybe we annul the marriage eventually, and you decide to homestead your own land. Maybe something else entirely. The point is, I am not going to force you into my bed or demand you act like my wife. You deserve the chance to choose your own path. Sarah felt something tight in her chest begin to loosen. That is extraordinarily generous of you. Zane shrugged. It is just fair. You have already had too many men make decisions for you. I do not want to be another one. And what do you get out of this arrangement? Sarah asked, still trying to understand his motives. Honestly, I am not sure yet. Maybe just the satisfaction of knowing I did something decent. Maybe companionship, if we find we get along well. I have been alone a long time. It might be nice to have someone to talk to. He paused, looking a bit uncomfortable. And I will admit, having help with the cooking and mending and such would be welcome. But I would pay you for that work, treat you as a hired hand, if that is what you prefer. Sarah shook her head slowly. You paid $500 for me. You cannot afford to pay me wages on top of that. Let me worry about my finances, Zane said firmly. So what do you think? Do we have an agreement? Sarah considered it carefully. She could say no. But then what? She had no money, no other prospects, nowhere else to go. But more than that, she found she did not want to say no. There was something about this gruff mountain man that called to her. Something solid and trustworthy that she desperately needed after months of uncertainty and fear. Yes, she said finally. We have an agreement. Zane nodded, looking relieved. Good. Then we will go into town tomorrow and get married by the justice of the peace. Just a simple legal ceremony. After that, we will come back here and figure out how to live together. The rest of that day passed peacefully. Zane showed Sarah around the property, introducing her to his 6 chickens, all of whom had names, and explaining his system for trapping and hunting. He was clearly proud of what he had built here, and Sarah found herself impressed by his self-sufficiency. He grew vegetables in a small garden, preserved meat in the smokehouse, and even had a root cellar dug into the hillside for storing potatoes and other supplies through the winter. It gets cold up here, he told her as they walked along the creek. Snow can be 6 feet deep or more. We will need to make sure we have enough supplies laid in before the first storm, probably by October. I usually go into town once a month during the summer and fall to stock up and sell my furs. What do you do all winter? Sarah asked. Read mostly, repair equipment, carve things. He gestured to the cabin. I made all the furniture myself. Gives me something to do with my hands when I'm stuck inside. Sarah thought about spending a winter snowed in with this near stranger and felt a flutter of nervousness and something else she could not quite name. Anticipation, perhaps. That evening, Zane gave her some of his clothes to sleep in, a shirt that hung to her knees and was soft from many washings. She changed in the loft while he prepared his bedroll below, and when she came down to bid him good night, she caught him staring at her with an expression she could not quite read. Heat, perhaps, but also tenderness. It made her blush and hurry back up the ladder. She lay awake for a long time, listening to his steady breathing below, wondering what she had gotten herself into. But she was not afraid. Whatever else Zane Decker might be, he was not cruel. Of that much, she was certain. The next morning, they rode back down to Clifton together. Sarah wore her calico dress from the auction, the nicest thing she owned, and Zane had trimmed his beard and tied his long hair back neatly. He looked almost civilized, though his buckskin clothes and the large knife at his belt marked him clearly as a mountain man. The justice of the peace was a weathered old man named Judge Crawley, who had seen it all in his 40 years on the frontier. He barely blinked at the odd pairing of the giant mountain man and the small Eastern woman, just had them sign the necessary papers and recite the vows. The whole thing took less than 10 minutes. "You are now man and wife," Judge Crawley intoned. "You may kiss the bride if you are so inclined." Zane and Sarah looked at each other awkwardly. After a moment, Zane leaned down and kissed her forehead gently, a chaste touch that somehow felt more intimate than a proper kiss might have. Sarah felt warmth spread through her chest. They stopped at the general store on the way out of town, and Zane bought supplies with the ease of someone who had done this many times before. But he also asked Sarah what she might like, what foods she preferred, what supplies she thought they would need. The storekeeper, a friendly woman named Mrs. Chen, whose husband had come from China to work on the railroads, chatted with Sarah about preserving fruits and making soap, offering tips and recipes. Sarah found herself enjoying the normal, domestic conversation, something she had been starved for during her time with the bride company. Zane also bought fabric, several yards of sturdy cotton in a pretty blue, and handed it to Sarah. "For making yourself some clothes that actually fit," he said. "Those Eastern dresses are not practical up in the mountains. You will need split skirts for riding and sturdier boots." Sarah was touched by his thoughtfulness. "Thank you." On the ride back up to the cabin, Sarah found herself relaxing against Zane's chest more easily than before, feeling less self-conscious about the intimacy of their position. She was married now, she reminded herself, even if it was a marriage in name only. At least for now. "What made you come out west?" she asked as Thunder picked his way up a particularly rocky section of trail. "You said you fought in the war, but that was almost 20 years ago. You must have been very young." 17 when I enlisted," Zane confirmed. "Lied about my age. I was big for my years, so they believed me. Fought at Gettysburg, Antietam, half a dozen other battles. Saw things no one should see." He was quiet for a moment. "When the war ended, I tried to go back to my family in Ohio. But I had nightmares. Could not sleep indoors. Jumped at every loud noise. My mother cried every time she looked at me. My father said I needed to pull myself together and act like a man. After a year, I realized I was making everyone miserable, including myself. So I packed up and headed west." "Do you still have nightmares?" Sarah asked softly. "Sometimes. Less than I used to. The mountains help. The quiet, the routine, the hard work. Out here, I feel like I can breathe." Sarah understood that feeling, though for different reasons. "I feel that way too," she admitted. "Like I can breathe for the first time in a long time." Zane's arms tightened around her briefly, a gesture of understanding and comfort. They rode the rest of the way in companionable silence. Over the next few weeks, Sarah and Zane settled into a routine. She took over the cooking and the garden work, mended his clothes, and kept the cabin clean. He hunted and trapped, chopped wood, and made repairs to the various structures on his property. They worked side by side in companionable silence most days, but the evenings were different. In the evenings, they talked. Zane, it turned out, was surprisingly well read. The books on his shelves included Shakespeare, Hawthorne, Cooper, and even some scientific texts on geology and botany. He had taught himself to read and write beyond the basics during his time in the Army, and had continued his education in the years since. Sarah, who had always loved books, found herself drawn into long discussions about literature and philosophy, debates that sometimes lasted until the fire burned low, and they both had to force themselves to go to bed. "I thought you were just a trapper," Sarah said one evening, about 3 weeks into their arrangement. "But you are so much more than that." Zane looked embarrassed. "A man can be more than one thing. I trap because it is what I know and it pays well. But that does not mean I want to be ignorant of the wider world." "Most men I have known did not care about such things," Sarah said. "They thought education was wasted on women and philosophy was idle nonsense." "Then most men you have known were fools," Zane said bluntly, making her laugh. Sarah found herself laughing more as the days passed, something that surprised her. She had not expected to be happy here, had not expected to feel anything beyond relief at being safe. But happiness crept up on her in small moments. The taste of wild strawberries Zane showed her how to find in the meadow. The sight of an eagle soaring over the canyon. The warmth of the sun on her face as she hung laundry to dry. The sound of Zane's deep voice reading aloud to her while she mended by lamplight. And then there were the other feelings, the ones that confused and frightened her a bit. The way her pulse quickened when Zane came back from hunting, his shirt damp with sweat and clinging to his muscular frame. The way she found herself watching his hands as he worked, so large and capable. The way she had started sleeping in his shirts, not because she lacked other options now, but because they smelled like him, like pine and wood smoke and something uniquely masculine. One morning in early August, Sarah woke to the sound of cursing from below. She climbed down the ladder quickly to find Zane sitting at the table, his hand wrapped in a blood-soaked cloth. "What happened?" she asked, hurrying to his side. "Knife slipped while I was skinning a rabbit," Zane said through gritted teeth. "Caught my palm. It is deep." Sarah carefully unwrapped the cloth and examined the wound. He was right. It was deep and would need stitching. "I will need to sew this up," she said. "Do you have needle and thread?" "In the kit by the fireplace. And there is whiskey in the cupboard. You should pour some on the wound to clean it." Sarah gathered what she needed, her hands steady despite her nervousness. She had helped her father once when he cut his hand badly, so she knew the basics. She cleaned the wound with whiskey, making Zane hiss with pain, then threaded the needle with steady fingers. "This is going to hurt," she warned. "Just do it quickly," Zane said. Sarah worked as fast as she could, making neat, small stitches to close the gaping wound. Zane sat rigid, his jaw clenched, but he did not cry out or pull away. When she was done, she wrapped his hand in clean cloth and sat back. "There. It should heal cleanly if you keep it dry and do not use that hand too much." Zane looked at her with something like wonder. "You did that well? Very steady? Where did you learn?" "My father cut himself badly once on broken glass. The doctors showed me how to stitch it because I was the only one there to help." Sarah cleaned up the bloody cloths and put away the medical supplies. You should rest today. Let that hand start to heal. I cannot rest. I have traps to check and wood to split. I can check the traps, Sarah said firmly. And the wood can wait a day. You're not going to undo my stitches by being stubborn. Zane looked like he wanted to argue, but then he sagged back in his chair. Fine, but only for today. Sarah made him breakfast and then set out to check his trap line, something she had watched him do enough times to manage on her own. She found 2 rabbits and a marten, reset the traps as he had taught her, and brought everything back to the cabin. Zane watched her skin and gut the animals with a mixture of approval and surprise. You learn fast, he said. I pay attention, Sarah replied. And I am not afraid of hard work or getting my hands dirty. Something shifted between them that day. Zane seemed to see her differently, not as a fragile Eastern woman who needed protection, but as a capable partner who could hold her own in this rough country. And Sarah saw herself differently too, realizing she was stronger than she had thought. That evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sun set over the canyon, Zane spoke quietly. I'm glad you are here, Sarah. Not just because you saved my hand from getting infected today, but because you make this place feel less lonely. I did not realize how much I missed having someone to share things with until you arrived. Sarah's heart beat faster. I am glad I am here too. I know this was not how either of us expected our lives to go, but I cannot imagine being anywhere else right now. Zane reached over with his good hand and took hers, his touch gentle despite his size. They sat like that until the stars came out, hands linked, neither of them speaking, but both understanding that something important had just happened. They were no longer strangers bound by a legal contract. They were becoming something more. The days grew shorter as summer waned into fall, and the nights grew cooler. Zane's hand healed cleanly, the stitches coming out after 2 weeks to reveal a neat scar across his palm. Sarah had finished making herself several practical dresses from the fabric he had bought her, along with a split riding skirt that allowed her to ride thunder without assistance. She had also made Zane 2 new shirts, having noticed that his old ones were wearing thin in places. You did not have to do this, he said when she presented them to him, but his face showed his pleasure. I wanted to, Sarah said simply. They rode into Clifton together in mid-September to stock up for winter. The town was bustling with activity as everyone prepared for the cold months ahead. In the general store, Mrs. Chen greeted Sarah warmly. You look well, the older woman observed. Mountain life agrees with you. Sarah realized it was true. She had gained weight, her face no longer gaunt from near starvation. Her hands were calloused from work, but she felt strong and capable. The fear that had haunted her eyes for so long had faded. It does, she agreed. Very much. While Zane was loading their supplies onto a borrowed pack mule, a well-dressed man approached Sarah. He was handsome in a polished way, with slicked back hair and city clothes, and he looked completely out of place in frontier Arizona. Excuse me, he said. Are you Mrs. Decker? Sarah tensed immediately, her instincts warning her. I am. Who are you? My name is Reginald Garrett. I run the Continental Bride Company's boarding house in Santa Fe. I believe you stayed with me briefly. Sarah's blood ran cold. This was the man who had hurt her, who had twisted her wrists and locked her in her room. She took a step back, looking around for Zane. Garrett noticed her reaction and held up his hands in a placating gesture. Please, do not be alarmed. I came to apologize. After your auction, there were complaints from some of the other women. The company investigated and found that I had been too harsh in my methods. They dismissed me from my position. Too harsh? Sarah's voice shook with anger. You tortured me. You starved me. I was trying to prepare you for frontier life, which can be difficult for refined Eastern women. But I see now that my methods were inappropriate. I am sorry, Mrs. Decker. Truly. Sarah wanted to believe him, wanted to think that people could change. But something in his eyes, a coldness behind the apologetic words, made her doubt his sincerity. You should leave, she said. I accept your apology, but I do not want to see you again. Garrett's expression hardened for just a moment, a flash of the cruelty she remembered, before smoothing back into false contrition. Of course, I understand. I just wanted to clear my conscience before I left the territory. He tipped his hat and walked away, and Sarah released a breath she had not realized she was holding. When Zane came around the corner and saw her face, he immediately crossed to her side. What is wrong? You are white as a sheet. That man, Sarah said, pointing at Garrett's retreating back. That is the man from the boarding house, the one who hurt me. Zane's expression went dark and dangerous. Stay here. He strode after Garrett with the purposeful gait of a predator stalking prey. Sarah hurried after him, not wanting violence, but unable to stay behind. Zane caught up with Garrett at the edge of town and grabbed his shoulder, spinning him around. You, Zane said, his voice low and deadly. You are the one who put those marks on my wife. Garrett tried to pull away, but Zane's grip was iron. I apologized to her. The matter is settled. The matter is not settled until I say it is. Zane's free hand clenched into a fist. You hurt her. You starved her. You broke her down and made her afraid. Give me one good reason why I should not break you in return. I am a businessman, just trying to make a living. Garrett protested. Those women needed discipline. Discipline? Zane's voice rose. You call torture discipline? A crowd was gathering now, drawn by the confrontation. Sarah pushed through them all and put her hand on Zane's arm. Please, she said quietly. He is not worth it. Let him go. Zane looked at her, his chest heaving, struggling with his anger. Finally, he released Garrett with a shove that sent the smaller man stumbling. You have 5 minutes to get out of this town, Zane said. If I see you again, I will not be so merciful. And if I hear you have hurt any other women, I will hunt you down. That is a promise. Garrett straightened his jacket with shaking hands, his face pale. You cannot threaten me like this. I am not threatening you. I am making you a promise. Zane took a step forward, and Garrett scrambled backward. 4 minutes. Garrett fled, practically running to where his horse was tied. He mounted clumsily and spurred the animal into a gallop, disappearing down the road in a cloud of dust. The crowd slowly dispersed, murmuring among themselves. Zane stood rigid, his fists still clenched, until Sarah touched his arm again. Thank you, she said softly, for defending me. Zane's expression softened as he looked down at her. I will always defend you. No one is going to hurt you while I draw breath. Sarah felt something shift and settle in her chest, a certainty that had been building for weeks. She was falling in love with this man, this fierce, gentle giant who had saved her and protected her and treated her with more kindness than she had ever known. The realization both thrilled and terrified her. They finished loading their supplies in silence and began the long ride back up the mountain. The pack mule followed Thunder steadily, weighted down with flour and sugar, coffee and salt, and all the other necessities they would need to survive the winter. Sarah rode in front of Zane as always, his arms around her. But now she was intensely aware of every point of contact between them. The solid warmth of his chest against her back, the strength of his thighs bracketing hers, the way his breath stirred her hair. "You are quiet," Zane observed after they had been riding for an hour. "Are you all right?" "I am thinking," Sarah said. "About what?" She hesitated, then decided to be honest. "About us. About how much things have changed since the auction." "Changed how?" Sarah turned her head to look at him, finding his face very close to hers. "I am not afraid anymore, of you or of anything. You have made me feel safe in a way I never have before." Zane's eyes searched hers, and she saw her own feelings reflected there, want and wonder and something deeper. "Sarah," he said, his voice rough, "I need to tell you something." "What is it?" "This arrangement we made about giving ourselves time to decide if we wanted a real marriage. I have decided. I want you as my wife. Not just on paper, but in every way. I think I have wanted that since the moment I saw you on that platform." He paused, swallowing hard. "But only if you want that too. I will never force you or pressure you. If you want to keep things as they are, I will respect that. But I need you to know how I feel." Sarah's heart was pounding so hard she was sure he could hear it. "How long have you felt this way?" "Weeks. Maybe from the beginning, though I tried to deny it. You are smart and brave and beautiful, and you make me laugh. And I have been half out of my mind wanting you, while also wanting to give you the space you needed to heal." Sarah made a decision. She twisted in the saddle, difficult with Thunder still walking, and cupped Zane's face in her hands. "Then stop giving me space," she said, and kissed him. For a moment, Zane was frozen in surprise, but then he was kissing her back, one arm banding around her waist to hold her steady while his other hand came up to cradle the back of her head. The kiss was everything Sarah had never known she wanted. Fierce and tender at once, full of weeks of pent-up longing. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Zane rested his forehead against hers. "Are you sure?" he asked. "I do not want you to feel obligated." "I am sure," Sarah said. "I want this. I want you. Not because I am obligated, but because I am falling in love with you, Zane Decker. And I think I have been for a while now." Zane's smile was radiant, transforming his usually serious face. "I am falling in love with you too. Have been, like I said." They rode the rest of the way home in a state of dazed happiness, stopping frequently to kiss, the pack mule trailing patiently behind them. By the time they reached the cabin, the sun was setting and they were both giddy with joy and anticipation. Zane unloaded their supplies quickly, while Sarah lit lamps and started a fire. They ate a simple dinner, but neither of them tasted the food, too aware of each other and what the night would bring. When they finished, Zane took Sarah's hand. "Are you nervous?" he asked gently. "A little," she admitted. "Mr. Garrett made me afraid of many things, but not of you. Never of you." "We will go slow," Zane promised. "And if you want to stop at any point, we stop. No questions asked." Sarah nodded, trusting him completely. Zane led her up the ladder to the loft, which he had clearly prepared earlier while she was cooking. The blankets were clean and freshly shaken out, and he had even picked wildflowers and put them in a cup by the window. The gesture of thoughtfulness made Sarah's throat tight with emotion. "You did this for me?" "I have been hoping for this," Zane admitted. "Dreaming about it, honestly. I wanted it to be special if it happened." Sarah kissed him again, pouring all her feelings into it. They undressed each other slowly, Zane's large hands gentle as he unlaced her bodice, Sarah's fingers trembling as she unbuttoned his shirt. When they were finally skin to skin, lying together in the soft lamplight, Zane took his time learning her body, kissing every bruise and scar, murmuring words of love and devotion that made Sarah feel cherished in a way she never had before. Their lovemaking was tender and passionate, awkward in places because they were still learning each other, but beautiful in its honesty and emotion. Zane kept his promise, checking in with her constantly, making sure she was comfortable and happy. And Sarah, who had been so afraid after what Garrett had done, found that with Zane, there was no fear at all. Only love and trust and a bone-deep sense of rightness. Afterward, they lay tangled together under the blankets, Sarah's head on Zane's broad chest, his arms around her. She could hear his heartbeat, steady and strong, and feel the rise and fall of his breathing. "I love you," she said into the darkness. "I love you too," Zane replied, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. More than I knew it was possible to love someone. They fell asleep like that, wrapped in each other's arms. And for the first time since coming west, Sarah dreamed of the future instead of the past. The winter came early that year, with the first snow falling in late October. By November, they were truly snowed in, the world beyond the cabin transformed into a white wonderland. But inside, the cabin was warm and cozy, and Sarah had never been happier. She and Zane fell into an easy routine, working together to maintain their little homestead. In the mornings, they would tend to the animals and check that everything was secure. Then Zane would spend time repairing equipment or carving, while Sarah cooked and sewed. In the afternoons, they would read together or play chess on the board Zane had made. In the evenings, they would make love and fall asleep in each other's arms. One snowy afternoon in December, Sarah realized she had missed her monthly courses. Twice now. She sat in the rocking chair by the fire, her hand on her still flat stomach, and felt a mixture of joy and trepidation. A baby. They were going to have a baby. When Zane came in from checking on Thunder, stomping snow off his boots, Sarah looked up at him with shining eyes. "I have something to tell you," she said. He read her expression and was at her side in an instant, kneeling by the rocking chair. "What is it? Are you all right?" "I am more than all right." "Zane, I think I am pregnant." For a moment, he was perfectly still, and Sarah's heart clenched with worry. Maybe he did not want children. Maybe she should have discussed this possibility with him before now. But then his face broke into the widest smile she had ever seen, and he pulled her into his arms. "A baby," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "We are going to have a baby." "Are you happy?" Sarah asked, needing to hear him say it. "Happy?" "Sarah, I am beyond happy. I am overjoyed. I never thought I would have this, a wife I love and a child on the way. I thought I would spend my whole life alone up here. But you changed everything." Sarah clung to him, feeling tears of happiness spill down her cheeks. "I love you so much." "I love you too. Both of you." He placed his hand gently on her stomach. "I am going to be a father." The rest of the winter passed in a haze of contentment. Zane became even more protective than before, insisting Sarah not lift anything heavy or do anything too strenuous. Sarah found his concern endearing, even when it became slightly overbearing. She let him fuss over her, understanding it was his way of showing love. They spent long evenings planning for the baby, deciding where to put a cradle, what supplies they would need, what they would name the child. Zane began carving a beautiful rocking cradle from pine, working on it lovingly for hours each night. Sarah sewed tiny clothes from scraps of fabric, marveling at how small the garments were. "What if I am not a good mother?" she confessed one night as they lay in bed. "What if I do something wrong?" "You will be a wonderful mother," Zane said with certainty. "You are kind and patient and strong. Our child is lucky to have you." "What if you're not a good father?" Sarah asked, teasing him gently. "Then you will help me learn to be better." Zane said seriously, "Just like you have helped me learn to be a better man." "I was so closed off before you came, Sarah. I had built walls around my heart to keep from being hurt. But you broke through those walls without even trying, just by being yourself." Sarah kissed him tenderly. "You were already a good man. I did not change that. I just helped you see it." When spring finally came, melting the snow and revealing the green world beneath, they rode down to Clifton together. Sarah was showing now, her pregnancy visible in the gentle swell of her stomach. Mrs. Chen was delighted by the news and threw an impromptu celebration at the general store, inviting all the women in town to bring baby gifts and advice. "You have built a good life," Mrs. Chen said as they sat on the store's porch, watching Zane talk with some of the other men. "When I first saw you at that auction, I worried for you. You looked so frightened and small. But look at you now, strong and happy and loved." "I found the right man," Sarah said simply. "Against all odds, I found the one person who could see past what had been done to me and help me heal." "He found the right woman too," Mrs. Chen observed. "Zane was always a good man, but he was lonely, hard and closed off. You softened him, made him whole again." Sarah watched her husband across the street, his broad shoulders and long hair marking him as the mountain man he was, and felt a surge of love so strong it almost hurt. He looked up at that moment and met her eyes, and the smile he gave her was warm enough to melt glaciers. They stayed in town for 2 days, visiting the doctor to make sure everything was progressing well with the pregnancy, stocking up on supplies, and simply enjoying the company of other people. But both of them were eager to return to their mountain home, to the life they had built together. The baby came in late June, on a warm afternoon when the wildflowers were in full bloom and the mountain air was sweet with pine. The labor was long and difficult, and there were moments when Zane feared he would lose Sarah. But she was strong and determined. And finally, after 18 hours, their son was born. Zane cut the cord with shaking hands and wrapped the squalling infant in a clean blanket before placing him in Sarah's arms. She looked down at their child, this tiny, perfect being they had created together, and felt her heart expand in ways she had never imagined possible. "He is beautiful," she whispered. "He is perfect." Zane agreed, his voice rough with emotion. He was crying openly, tears streaming down his weathered face. "You are both perfect." They named him Samuel, after Sarah's father, with the middle name of Zachary, after Zane. Little Samuel had his mother's green eyes and his father's dark hair. And from the beginning, it was clear he had inherited his father's size. Even as an infant, he was large and sturdy. Zane took to fatherhood with the same fierce dedication he brought to everything. He carved toys for Samuel, sang to him in his deep voice, and walked the floor with him during the long nights when the baby would not sleep. Sarah would wake to find them together by the window, Zane holding their son and pointing out constellations, explaining the world in a soft murmur that made her heart ache with love. The years passed in a rhythm of seasons. Samuel grew from infant to toddler to boy, strong and adventurous like his father, curious and intelligent like his mother. When he was 3, Sarah gave birth to a daughter they named Mary, after Zane's mother. 2 years after that, another son came, Thomas. And finally, when Sarah was 30 and Zane was 38, they had one more daughter, little Margaret. Their cabin expanded over the years to accommodate their growing family. Zane built on 2 more rooms, giving the children their own space, and added a larger barn and chicken coop. The garden grew bigger, and Sarah learned to preserve enough food to feed a family of 6 through the long winters. They were not wealthy by any means, but they were rich in the ways that mattered. Samuel grew into a tall, strong young man, much like his father, taking over many of the trapping duties as Zane's back began to bother him in his later years. Mary inherited her mother's quick mind and love of books, and Sarah taught her to read and write until Mary knew as much as any city-educated girl. Thomas was the wild one, always off exploring the mountains and getting into scrapes. And Margaret, the baby, was the heart of the family, sweet and loving and adored by everyone. One evening, when Sarah was 40 and Zane was 48, they sat on their porch watching the sunset, just as they had done countless times before. Their children were grown now, making their own lives. Samuel had married a rancher's daughter and was building a cabin on the other side of the mountain. Mary was teaching school in Clifton and courting the young doctor who had recently arrived in town. Thomas and Margaret were still at home, but both were old enough to manage most of the work themselves. "Do you ever regret it?" Sarah asked, taking Zane's weathered hand in hers. "Spending $500 on a stranger at an auction?" Zane laughed, the sound rich and warm. "Not for a single moment. That $500 bought me everything that matters. Love, family, a life worth living. It was the best investment I ever made." "I thought you were mad when you roared at the auctioneer about my bruises," Sarah admitted. This giant, fierce mountain man demanding answers. I was terrified and fascinated at the same time. I could not just stand there and do nothing. When I saw those marks on your wrists, something in me snapped. I knew I had to protect you, even though I did not know you at all. Zane brought her hand to his lips and kissed it gently. "I think I fell in love with you in that moment, before I even knew your name." "I fell in love with you slowly," Sarah said. "A little bit more each day, until one day I realized I could not imagine my life without you. You healed me, Zane. You showed me what love was supposed to be." "We healed each other," Zane corrected. "I was so broken when you arrived, Sarah. I had convinced myself I was fine living alone up here, but I was not fine at all. I was slowly turning into stone. You brought me back to life." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the colors change in the sky. The mountains stretched out before them, purple and gold in the fading light, beautiful and wild and home. Somewhere below, a coyote called, and the evening birds sang their final songs before settling in for the night. "Do you remember when Garrett showed up in town?" Sarah asked, "How angry you were?" "I wanted to kill him," Zane admitted, "for what he did to you. I have never felt rage like that before or since." "But you did not kill him. You let him go because I asked you to." "Of course I did. Your wishes matter more to me than revenge." Zane squeezed her hand. "Did you ever wonder what happened to him?" "Sometimes. I like to think he changed, became a better person. But I suspect he did not." "Probably not. Men like that rarely change. But he is not our concern anymore. He is just a bad memory from a different life." Sarah leaned her head on Zane's shoulder, feeling the solid warmth of him, the strength that had never failed her in all their years together. "I am so grateful for this life we built, for every moment of it. even the hard parts. "So am I," Zane said. He wrapped his arm around her shoulders and pulled her close. "So am I." As darkness fell and the stars began to appear, they remained on the porch, wrapped in each other's arms. Inside the cabin, lamplight glowed warmly through the windows, and they could hear Thomas playing his harmonica while Margaret sang along. It was a simple life, but it was theirs, built on love and trust and the courage it took to open their hearts to each other. Sarah thought about that day in the auction square. How terrified she had been, how broken. She thought about the mountain man who had roared his outrage at her injuries and then done the unthinkable, spending a fortune to save a stranger. She thought about all the days and nights since then, the laughter and tears, the children they had raised, the life they had built together, from nothing but determination and love. "Thank you," she whispered to Zane. "For what?" "For seeing me, for saving me, for loving me." Zane kissed the top of her head, a gesture he had made thousands of times, but which never failed to make her feel cherished. "Thank you for letting me. Thank you for loving me back. Thank you for giving me a family and a reason to wake up every morning with joy in my heart." They stayed there until the night grew cold and they had to go inside. But even then, they remained close, still holding hands like they had on their first night together in this cabin. Love had found them in the most unexpected way, in the dusty square of a frontier town, and it had carried them through every challenge and hardship the years had brought. As they climbed into bed that night, their bodies fitting together with the ease of decades of practice, Sarah reflected on the strange and wonderful journey her life had taken. From the scared, bruised woman on an auction platform to the happy, confident mother and wife she was now. From thinking she would never be safe or loved to having more of both than she had ever dreamed possible. "I love you," she said into the darkness, just as she had on their first night together. "I love you too," Zane replied, just as he always did. More than life itself. And in the morning, they would wake together as they always did, ready to face another day in their mountain home, surrounded by the family they had built and the love that sustained them through everything. It was not the life Sarah had imagined for herself when she left Philadelphia all those years ago, but it was infinitely better than anything she could have dreamed. The mountain man who roared at a bride auction had indeed done the unthinkable. He had taken a broken woman and helped her heal. He had offered her safety and kindness and eventually love. And in doing so, he had saved not just her life, but his own, finding in her the missing piece of himself he had not even known was lost. Their love story was simple in many ways. Two damaged people finding solace and joy in each other. But it was also extraordinary, a testament to the power of compassion and the courage it takes to open your heart when you have been hurt. They had both been marked by their pasts, Sarah by her bruises and Zane by his war memories. But together, they had created something beautiful and lasting. As the years continued to pass and they grew old together, they never forgot those first moments. The auction square, the roared question, the gentle touch, the slow building of trust and affection that eventually became the deepest love either of them had ever known. They told the story to their children and eventually their grandchildren, wanting them to understand that love can come from the most unexpected places and that sometimes the greatest act of courage is choosing to trust again after you have been hurt. And when Zane finally passed away, peacefully in his sleep at the age of 72, surrounded by his children and grandchildren, Sarah held his hand just as she had on so many nights before. She mourned him deeply, but also celebrated the life they had shared. the love that had sustained them through everything. She lived another 5 years after his death, long enough to see her great-grandchildren born, long enough to know that the family they had built together would continue long after she was gone. When her own time came, she died in the same cabin where they had lived their life together, in the same bed where they had made love and comforted each other, and simply existed side by side. Her children were with her, and as she drew her last breaths, she smiled, thinking of Zane and knowing she would see him again. The cabin still stands on that mountain, maintained by the descendants of Zane and Sarah Decker. It is a reminder of how two broken people found each other in the Wild West and built something lasting, of how a mountain man's roar of protective outrage at a bride auction led to one of the greatest love stories the Arizona territories ever witnessed, of how the unthinkable act of spending $500 on a bruised stranger changed not just 2 lives, but generations to come. Their story became legend in Clifton and the surrounding areas, passed down through the years as an example of what true love looks like. Not the easy, comfortable kind that comes without effort, but the hard-won love that is built on trust and respect and the willingness to be vulnerable. The kind of love that transforms people, that makes them better and stronger than they could ever be alone. And if you visit that cabin today and stand on the porch where they spent so many evenings together, you can almost feel their presence still lingering in the mountain air. The love they shared, the life they built, the legacy they left behind. It all started with a roar and a question, with bruises that should never have been there and a man who refused to look away. It started with the unthinkable act of caring about a stranger, and it ended with a love that transcended death itself, living on in the hearts and memories of everyone who knew them. That is the story of Zane Decker and Sarah Whitmore, the mountain man and the bride from the auction who found each other against all odds and built a love that would last forever. It is a reminder that sometimes the best things in life come from the most unexpected moments, and that love, real love, is always worth fighting for.